If you're thinking of moving to Australia, you've probably wondered how much it costs to rent a home in Australia. I'm Lisa from Australian travel migration blog dreamingofdownunder.com, and I moved to Australia by myself in 2015 from the UK. In my previous video I went through how much properties cost to buy in Australia, but I know a lot of you will want to rent a home at least for a while when you first move over here. Since rental costs vary so much across Australia, I thought it would be useful to go through the median rent in each of the state capitals across Australia. I'll also run through the best websites to use to find a place to rent, as well as where to find a room in a share house if that's a better option for you. And I'll also touch on the current rental crisis in Australia. Okay, let's get started. First of all, where do you find properties to rent in Australia? The two main property websites to buy and to rent properties are domain.com.au and realestate.com.au. So you just plug in a city or region or suburb and it will bring up results. Another option, particularly if you want to find a room in a share house, is flatmates.com.au. I lived in a couple of share houses and I found rooms straight away on there. You set up a profile and you can either look for a room to rent, or you can select a whole property, or you can find other flatmates who are looking to live in the same area as you, so you can rent a house together. Something to note is that Australia gives rental figures in weeks rather than months, and in my experience you normally pay your rent weekly as well instead of monthly, so it's different to in the UK. Before I get into the figures, I just want to touch on the fact that Australia is currently in a rental crisis, so if you do move here you'll see this all over the news. I've just been through an article by macrobusiness.com.au that I'll link to below, which explains some of the reasons for this. So rental vacancy rates in Australia are the lowest they've been in 16 years, and rental costs have really gone up in some places, and the demand for rental properties is higher than the supply, unfortunately. One of the theories for this as to why is, even though the population hasn't really risen in Australia, because remember we've had our international borders closed for a couple of years, that people don't want to live in these big share houses anymore, and the average number of people living in each household has gone down, which means that basically we need more houses to house everybody. Another theory is that legislation changes have meant that a lot of landlords have sold up their properties, and also that because of the big housing boom, a lot of landlords have sold up to cash in on that. In the 12 months to March 2022, rents have gone up nationally by 8.7%. And in regional areas that have become more popular to live in during the pandemic because people don't need to commute to the cities anymore, they've gone up 10.7%. Also, the government has plans to have 235,000 migrants per year coming into Australia, which is going to obviously push up the demand for rental properties even more. I just wanted to make you aware of this in case you're moving over here, because there are news reports of families living in cars and all sorts of things. Just one thing in case this suits anybody who happens to be watching: I'm a house sitter, so I get paid to live in properties and look after people's pets, and there's never been a bigger demand for house sitting. Lots and lots of people have bought pets during the pandemic, and now that we're suddenly allowed to travel, everyone has gone absolutely nuts for holidays, and I'm completely booked out. So if that's something that might suit any of you, that's something to look into. I'll leave links to some websites below. Now I'm going to run through the median weekly rent across the state capitals of Australia, and I'm going to start with the prices for houses. The most expensive capital city to rent it in Australia is currently Canberra, with a median weekly rent of $720. Next is Sydney at $650, and next is Darwin at $620 a week. Just note that this is very different than the prices to buy property. Sydney is the most expensive city to buy a property in, and Darwin is actually cheapest, so that's quite bizarre that they're so close to each other in terms of rent. Tying for the 4th and 5th place is Hobart and Brisbane, which are both at $550 a week. Next is Perth at $500, then Adelaide at $480, and cheapest is Melbourne at $470 a week. So Melbourne is one of the more expensive cities to buy a property in, but during the pandemic they had a really tough time with lockdowns, and a lot of people, tens of thousands of people, left Melbourne and Victoria to live either abroad or in different states. So a lot of people moved up to Queensland. So Melbourne rent is currently very, very cheap compared to the other cities, but I don't know how long that would last for. Next, I'll run through the median weekly rents for flats or units in Australia. So the most expensive again is Canberra at $560 a week. Second is Sydney at $530 a week. Then Darwin at $500, Hobart is $465. Brisbane is $450 a week. Perth is also $450 a week. Melbourne is $425 a week, and cheapest is Adelaide at $400 a week. Another thing to note is that the variation in rents across Australia isn't quite as big as the variation in property prices to buy. So to buy, Sydney at the most expensive for a house is 2.5 times more than Darwin, which is the cheapest. Note that the cost of renting in the different cities isn't completely in line with the cost of buying in the different cities. They're in a bit of a different order. So if you're interested in buying in the future, then I would watch my other video on property prices in Australia just to get a fair view. Next, I'm going to go through the cost to rent a room in a share house. So if you don't want to pay too much for rent, or you just want to meet lots of people when you first move here, a share house can be a good idea. In the more expensive cities like Sydney, it's quite common to live in share houses, even for older people. I've lived in a couple of share houses and they had people right up to their 50s in them. I used flatmates.com.au to find somewhere to live for the share houses that I lived in, and there was loads and loads of choice on there. I can't find any figures on the average prices to rent a room, but I had a look on flatmates.com.au and I looked at Sydney, which is the most expensive, and Darwin, just to give you some kind of average prices. In Sydney, the cheapest room that I saw was $100, which is bizarrely cheap. I would be very suspicious of that in Sydney. The most expensive rooms were at $700 a week, but they were very, very fancy homes overlooking beaches, basically. I would say the average for a share house in Sydney would be about $300 to $350 a week. I paid $250 about a year and a half ago to go in a really, really lovely share house, which was near a beach. And I paid $300 a week to go in another flat that was very, very close to the beach, but a little bit dated. And they were both in Sydney's northern beaches. In Darwin, the cheapest was $130 a week, and the most expensive I saw was $630 a week. But then after that one property, they jumped down to $400. The bulk of properties in Darwin seem to be around $250 a week. So I would say, depending on which city you want to live in, for a kind of average size room in an average share house, you're probably looking at $250 to $350 a week on average. When I was looking for a share house, I found that a lot of the properties included bills, so that figure would probably include your bills. In terms of the bills you'll need to pay if you're renting a whole place to yourself, in Australia it's usual for your landlord to pay your council tax, which is very different to in the UK where the tenant has to pay it. Also, I found in a lot of places the landlord tends to pay the water as well. I'm not sure if that's just in apartments. And one thing to note is that Australia doesn't have gas central heating in the homes like in the UK. So if you've got an electric oven, you might not have a gas supply at all. So now I'll run through some of the average figures for electricity across Australia. These figures are from a report by the Australian Energy Market Commission as at December 2021. And this is the average electricity bill in Australia for a two-person household. And that comes in at $1,645 per year, which is $137 a month or $32 per week. These do vary across the states, so the annual costs in the different states are in the ACT, which is where Canberra is, and Tasmania, they were $2,004 a year. In Western Australia, it was $1,992 a year. In South Australia, it was $1,742 a year. Victoria was $1,290 a year. New South Wales was $1,253 a year, and Queensland was $1,226 a year. So they are not in any way in line with the prices of buying or renting property across Australia. And here are some figures for average gas bills across Australia from a report from Canstar Blue in January 2022. This is based on households of all sizes, and it's the quarterly gas bill. So the quarterly gas bill in Western Australia is $141. In Queensland, it was $178. In New South Wales, it was $186. In South Australia, it was $212. In Victoria, it was $230. And in the Australian Capital Territory, it was $314. Okay, I hope that was useful. Please let me know in the comments if you're thinking of moving to Australia and where you're thinking of going to. And please like and subscribe for more videos on life in Australia. Thanks for watching. I'll also... Hello. Stop trying to be on the internet. I need just to show off. Do you want to be on YouTube? You want to be on YouTube?